this girl didn't really know what you meant when you said countryside. In the middle of Newcastle, she'd only seen a few fields. But now, as the steam train was chugging its way into the station to a place that she'd never even heard of, for she was an evacuee, she was being taken to Guisborough, far away from the bombing, far away from her family. She was frightened. All of the children had been talking on the train about where they were going, who they would be with, and what the families would be like. She was frightened, but she tried not to show it. But there was one thing that she did know. There were shortages of things inside of Newcastle, rationing. And now, on this wet and cold winter's morning, she could hear the bells ringing inside of Guisborough. The train came into the station as the bells clanged all around her, and she could see that the children were being chosen one by one and taken away from that place to their new families. She wondered what would happen. Now she was standing there, and she could see a rich woman, a woman with a fine coat upon her back, and she was walking towards her with a smile on her face, and she could hear her speak as she said, "You're with me. You're coming home to my house. You'll like it. It's not the biggest house in the town." Now, the girl had seen some of the old houses. Some of them seemed huge. But this woman had a smile on her face, and she took her hand, and the two of them walked along towards the house. She could see that some of the shops were closed. There was one with an Italian-sounding name. And without even asking anything, this tall, kind woman said to her, "Oh yes, they had to close that because he was an Italian. He's a friend of that Hitler fella. Well, it's closed," but there was still a smell of smoke in the air, because on the hills and by the River Tees, there were still factories making munitions, making guns for the war that was raging. For it was December 1942, and they were the first of children to come to this place, Guisborough. What the girl didn't know was this woman had always wanted a child of her own daughter, and she was going to treat her well. When they got inside of the house, she couldn't believe it. She'd never seen a house so big. There were more rooms than she'd ever seen in all of her life. They could have fitted their house and half of the rest of the houses in the street, for she'd lived in a terraced house. She could see that there were stacks and piles of boxes, and in some of the boxes there were games that you recognised. There were drafts, but there was one game that had horses and castles, and as she reached towards one, the woman spoke and said, "That's chess. Would you like to play chess with me?" Still too frightened to speak, Mary MacDonald was sat down by the side of the fire with a chessboard in front of her, and the woman took time and patience to show her how to play chess. Dogs had been barking when they'd first got to the town of Guisborough at the crowded train station, and the faces had all looked unfamiliar and a little bit frightening. And now, as the rain was starting to fall, she realised that this was going to be a good place to stay for the rest of the war. That night, the woman's husband came back into the house. He had a huge, thick, black book, and he threw it down onto the table, knocking the chess pieces to one side. "These are the rules of the house. This is what you'll do. This is where you can go, and this is what you can do." He wasn't used to children, and for all he was bluff and brave on the outside, there was a warm side to him as his wife reached towards him and touched him on the hand and said, "This is Mary MacDonald, my dear, and I think that hello would have been a good way of greeting her." He realised that he'd been too strict, but he'd spent most of his time telling people to close the door, switch out that light, and now he said he would have to come back. He would have to come back after the bells had stopped ringing. He would come back and he would say hello properly Mary MacDonald lived for the rest of the war inside of that house, and she was treated so kindly that when she became a woman, she returned to that place, and she would often stand outside of the church and listen to the bells ringing, and she would smile and remember the feel of a chess piece in her hand as she sat with her new mother and father.